All right. Thank you for having us here. We will start showing a video that resumes a great deal of our research project. Just put in here. Sorry, the volume is not working.
Could we have audio for a second?
I don't know, I pressed the volume button, but it seems that something else came up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not very loud, but it's okay if it plays a little bit.
Jag kan rå utan oro, men mig skiljas från vännen utan att fälla tårar.
So, practicing Odin Teatret's archive is an ongoing research project funded by the Flanders Research Institute, taking place at Ghent University in Belgium. It is an interdisciplinary collaboration between two departments, the Studies in Performing Arts and Media, and the Institute for Psychoacoustics and Electronic Music. And Ioulia and I, we are the main researchers of the project. We have also additional institutions that are collaborating with us, mainly Manchester Metropolitan University, Aalborg University, Utrecht University, and the Nordisk Theater Laboratorium in Denmark.
This presentation draws on new approaches in performance studies concerned with the development of an epistemological framework for studying theatrical training techniques through archival reconfigurations in virtual reality. By sharing this ongoing research process, we aim to nourish the pressing discussion in archive studies on how to account for the documentation of embodied knowledge and intangible cultural heritage. The demands of such a discussion in current times call for a careful rearticulation of the goals of the production of archives, bringing space for the experience of the encounter of a user with the living materiality of the documents archived to unfold into new ways of making sense of the embedded, embodied knowledge displayed. The aim is to investigate what it means to develop, practice and perform an archive through the activation of Odin Teatret's embodied legacy in a virtual environment addressing the translation of technique through extended reality whilst developing dramaturgical approaches to archival practices. Odin Teatret is one of the oldest theatre groups in the world, with a tradition of research in embodied practices for more than 50 years. The group is the main force of the broader artistic institution known as Nordisk Theater Laboratorium in Denmark, which today is also home to new generations who have built their artistic work in dialogue with Odin's legacy. Over these decades, Odin has built up an extensive archive that is a fundamental source of knowledge for creators, academic students, and theater researchers.
Odin Teatret's archive involves not only the written documents stored over its 50 years of history, but also the codified physical training methods that the group developed to enhance the actors' bodily skills and presence. Therefore, in proposing the incorporation of archival documentation as a technological process that includes embodied knowledge, we look at contemporary strategies for dealing with histories of theatrical creation in which the user plays an active role in collaborating with the past and its future ramifications. By doing so, we follow the current discourse on archival practices by urging users and developers to reread history as a reconfiguration of documents, oral tales, and reconstructions through affective transmissions, where, quoting Rebecca Schneider, architectures of access places us in particular experiential relationships to knowledge. In this way, we take also on the challenge that Sueli Romik proposed as a rereading of Derrida's famous archive fever essay, when she says that asking about the politics of inventory becomes necessary since there are many ways to approach the artistic practices one wants to inventory. Such policies are distinguished less by the technical options that guide the production of an archive and more by the poetic force that the proposed device itself is able to convey. I am referring to its aptitude to make the practices inventoried have the possibility of activating sensitive experiences in the presence, necessarily different from those originally lived, but with the same critical density. Faced with this proposal, a question soon arises. What would be a poetic inventory itself be like? That is, the production of an archive for and not about an artistic experience or its mere cataloging.
During this project, then, we are facing the challenge of designing a navigation system through virtual reality, allowing us for an embedded embodiment to engage interactively and creatively with the archival material. This archive aims to feature two different forms for content. The first are the work demonstrations, which will be recorded and can be viewed in a more passive way. Work demonstrations are another way of speaking of performance lectures in a way. They are performative pieces, entanglements of the web of techniques that link the practitioners to subjectivities, histories, aesthetics, and to each other. The other part of the content, which is much more challenging, aims at translating technique in the virtual space. By means of motion capturing and other sensors, we begin to design an interactive system where the user can learn and train with theater practices taught by the practitioners as virtual avatars, or better, as virtual figures. This content is divided in three parts: exercises, which are goal-oriented, training principles, which explore, for instance, certain qualities of sound and movement, and tactics of composition, where these exercises and training principles are applied to artistic creation.
So from the perspective of a theater practitioner, in an organized performance situation, the performer's physical and mental presence is modeled according to principles which are different from those in the daily life. This extra daily use of the body-mind is what is called technique. The performer's different techniques can be conscious and codified, or else unconscious, but implicit in the use and repetition of a scenic practice. Transcultural analysis shows that it's possible to distinguish recurring principles in these techniques by means physical patterns that can be found in many different performance traditions around the world. These recurring principles are altered balance, which is an alteration of the daily technique of walking, of moving in space and keeping the body immobile, which leads to complex and seemingly superfluous luxury balance. Dynamic opposition, which is in the way in which a performer's body is shaped by a myriad of microtensions between opposing intentional forces. Consistent inconsistency, which are the ways in which scenic behavior is consistent within the realm of theatrical practice, but inconsistent in terms of daily life. Reduction, which is reducing the size of an action in space whilst maintaining the energetic quality in time. Equivalence, which is the building of scenic equivalence to daily behavior. And actor's dramaturgy, the amalgamation of the pre-expressive principles in the actor's body as an archive. And they are investigated with precise reference to the metaphors and technical vocabulary of various performance traditions around the world by Eugenio Barba, which is the director of Odin Teatret. They reside in written documents, audiovisual material, and most importantly, in the body as archive of the practitioners. This beginning of the research then focused on this particular challenge relating to movement archiving, which involves the development of algorithms for retrieval, classification, and recognition of such recurring principles. We won't have time here to expand on all the practices that we are capturing, but we would like to show 2 short videos that can give you an impression of the material that we are aiming to archive. So this is Iben Naho Rasmussen. She's one of the oldest Odin actresses at the moment, and she's performing an exercise that is called Out of Balance, where you almost fall, and then you have to throw the energy of the fall to another direction. And this is Mika Ioulia, which is a pupil from Iben Naho Rasmussen, performing an exercise that actually comes from mime, that is called plastics, where you have to segment different parts of your body and create different impulses from these parts of the body.
These practices were mapped into data and performed several times with intermissions for feedback on the capturing process by 10 practitioners, both performers from Odin Teatret and long-term pupils of them, which throughout their own careers have incorporated and transformed the original practices, adapting them accordingly to situated cultural circumstances, professional careers, and contemporary politics that have affected the theatre landscape. This collaboration reinforces, therefore, the genealogy of the practices investigated, starting from their creators, reaching new generations. When creating such an archive, new possibilities and challenges arise alike. The body of the performer, as well as that of the avatar, present and not present at the same time, encodes the information within them into parallel ways. The physical body carries the embodied knowledge in its materiality, while the virtual body holds patterns of information which can change with the slightest tweak of the code. Thus, it is this translation of information from theater practices to patterns of data, and then to an experience that will reintroduce the archive as an embodied experience, which will inevitably be of another nature than the one first captured with the practitioners. We are called to translate corporeal energies into virtual forces, physical bodies into their abstracted virtual counterparts, physical and vocal technique to metadata to an immersive architecture for navigating archives.
This term, following anthropologist Tim Ingold, that has followed philosopher and sociologist Henri Lefebvre, refers to the communicative fabric that mediates between the structural properties of space and the spatial or communicative practices that reproduce space. These new technologies we are playing with are becoming able to allow us to think processes of archiving differently, not anymore as a mere reproductions of what we suppose as truth, but as different translation systems which expose other logics to the process of acting upon knowledge. We begin to step away from the process of knowledge representation towards processes of techno-organic translations, which allows technique to be constantly actualized and reassembled as models for praxis and transmission.
We will now show you some excerpts from one of our first experiments called the 6 states of water, where we looked at the effective relationship between the body and the environment. Our hypothesis here is that designed virtual textures provoke and evoke changes in the quality of one's movements through an interactive play with such environments. This experiment was designed upon an exercise created by Odin actress Roberta Carreri, in which the trainee performs a movement score with different qualities of energy, namely fog, bubbles, little creek, Amazon River, iceberg, sea tempest. In our XR version, the participant moves through the 6 environments, being able to interact with them, carving space and creating space. The findings of the experiment will be analyzed both qualitatively and quantitatively, applying lab and effort analysis in the motion capture data collected. We have thus begun to design environments that can change one's movement quality, providing visual stimulus for interaction, allowing us to expand the digital topological analysis and description of actions into an effective and immersive experience to the user. Ultimately, we are aiming for a system which, inspired by Deleuze's ontology, will unfold space as a dynamic force embedded in topological textures, which allow the transmission of embodied knowledge through virtual interaction. In dealing with theater techniques, one's interest in research lies in creating and codifying different qualities of moving, which are filled with subtle intensities. In a few words, more than creating scores of movement, an actor looks for the inner processes within these scores. These inner processes have naturally an intrinsic relation to physical patterns of movement, slow, fast, strong, soft, and so on. Aligned with Deleuze's enunciation that difference in quality is subtended by a special difference, we argue that the articulation of this difference is one's inner processes can be produced by the encounter of the user with the design environment. Encounters, from his perspective, are generative and catalysts of processes of making sense, altering one's bodily qualities in similar fashion to the ways in which the recurring principles mentioned previously are articulated to enhance a performance presence.
As we are now, these designed virtual environments have become praxical territories that stimulate proprioception and kinesthesia, activated through the play between the immaterialities of the virtual and the actual. As I have mentioned elsewhere, the term praxical territory denotes the discipline-specific knowledge we each one of us carry, and its imbrication with our wider lived subjective experience. This fusion of craft and life opens up a space and place that reverberates with legacy and landscapes of mutual belongings. So we have shared in these writings an ongoing research process, which aims to nourish the pressing discussion in archive studies on how to account for the documentation of embodied knowledge and intangible cultural heritage. The demands of such a discussion in current times call for a careful rearticulation of the goals of the production of archives, bringing space for the experience of the encounter of a user with the living materiality of the documents archived to unfold into new ways of making sense of the embedded, embodied knowledge displayed. By elaborating on hybrids of both physical and virtual spaces, we allow a user to drift towards a new awareness of embodied knowledge transmission, production, and distribution, in which the freedom of a theater laboratory provides the space for an interactive and creative encounter with codified artistic techniques and practices through virtual reality immersion. In this sense, the archive becomes a dramaturgical tool for the actor, dancer, and performer, an architecture of access to find one's way through the great amount of data available nowadays through lived experience. Thank you.
Thanks.